The conference room on the 32nd floor of Meridian Capital smelled like leather chairs and quiet money. And when Josephine Abubakar walked through the glass doors with her portfolio under her arm, the receptionist looked up, looked past her, and said to the empty hallway behind her, "Can I help you find some, dear?" Josephine said, "I'm the 2 o'clock." The receptionist looked back at her, then down at the schedule, then back at her. The analyst position. Oh, a pause that lasted just long enough to mean something. "I'll let them know you're here." She sat in the waiting area for 22 minutes. The 2 men who arrived after her, both white, both in their 30s, both carrying the particular ease of men who had never once wondered if they belonged in a room, were called in after 4 minutes each. Josephine counted. She had learned to count things young. The notebook in her bag was burgundy. Small, the cover was worn smooth at the top right corner, from years of being pulled in and out of coat pockets on the subway. On the inside front cover, in her mother's handwriting, were 4 words in Yoruba that translated to something close to, "The ground holds the seed." Her mother had written those words the morning Josephine left Lagos at 21. With a scholarship to Dalhousie and 2 suitcases, and a photocopied research paper that her father had never been allowed to finish. She had carried the notebook every day for 9 years. She did not open it in the waiting area. She just held it on her lap with both hands, flat on the cover. The way a person holds something they don't want to lose. Edmund Hurst had been running Meridian Capital's infrastructure investment division for 18 years. He had a corner office, a Rotary Club plaque on the wall, and the particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been seriously wrong in front of anyone who mattered. His fund had an 11% average return over 2 decades. Decades, which was good, and he talked about it at dinner parties, which was constant. That morning before the interviews began, he had told his associate director, a man named Patrick O'Rell, that he had already made his decision. "There's a Ryerson kid," he said, stirring his coffee. 4th year at RBC before this. Clean record, sharp instincts. "I want him in before the Pemberton deal closes." Patrick had nodded. "What about the Dalhousie candidate?" Edmund had smiled the way a man smiles when the answer is obvious, and he is being charitable in explaining it. "Dalhousie's fine for actuarial work. This is infrastructure. The Pemberton file alone is worth $3.2 billion. I need someone who's been in rooms like this." "She's been shortlisted twice by the..." Patrick. Edmund set his mug down. "I am looking for a specific profile. Let's not make this complicated." Patrick did not say anything else. Josephine had been shortlisted twice by the Infrastructure Finance Review Board, a national body that evaluated emerging talent in Canadian capital markets. She had also 14 months ago filed a research note, unpublished, submitted through an anonymous academic forum, that identified what she believed was a structural miscalculation in the standard risk-weighting model used by every major infrastructure fund in the country. The model was called the Carver-Doyle framework. It had been built in 1987 by 2 economists at McGill and adopted by the industry with the kind of uncritical reverence that institutions reserve for things that are old enough to seem permanent. Edmund Hurst had used it in every deal he had closed for 18 years. He had taught a seminar on it at the Rotman School of Management. Josephine's note argued that the framework had a compounding error in how it weighted long-duration municipal bonds against currency fluctuation risk. The error was small in individual deals. Across a portfolio the size of Meridian's, it was, over a 30-year horizon, the difference between stability and catastrophic exposure. She had done the math 3 times. Then she had done it a 4th time, with a different model entirely, one built by a Nigerian economist named Dr. Emeka Abubakar, published in a small academic journal in 1998, and cited, in the 26 years since, by exactly 4 people in North America. Dr. Abubakar had never held a position at a Canadian or American university. His degree from the University of Ibadan had been called, in the language of several rejection letters he received in the early 1990s, not directly comparable to North American doctoral standards. He had worked as an accountant in Toronto for 11 years. He had died of a cardiac event when Josephine was 13. She had found the journal article in a box under her parents' bed 2 years after he died, folded inside a manila envelope, with her name written on the front in his careful handwriting. She had not known he had left it for her. She had not known he had written her name on it. She stood in the middle of her mother's bedroom in Scarborough for a long time before she could pick it up. That was the day she started the burgundy notebook. The interview room had a long table. 4 chairs on one side, 1 on the other. Edmund sat in the center. To his left was Patrick. To his right were 2 other senior partners, a woman named Sylvia Oates who ran compliance, and a man named Gordon Fife who had once in 1999 been quoted in the Globe and Mail calling emerging market research speculative noise. Josephine sat across from all 4 of them. Edmund glanced at her resume, set it face down on the table, and smiled. So, Dalhousie. Yes, and before that Lagos. I did my undergraduate there. Yes. He said it the way a person says, when they are deciding whether to take something seriously. We see a lot of international candidates come through. The challenge is always the same. There's a calibration period, getting used to how things work here, the specific regulatory environment, the market dynamics. It's not a knock, it's just reality. Josephine looked at him. I've been working in Canadian capital markets for 6 years. Of course, of course. He gestured at her file without touching it. Walk me through your view on the Pemberton Infrastructure Corridor. It's a live file for us. Josephine had known the Pemberton file would come up. She had spent 40 hours on it the previous month, not because she had been told to, but because it was the kind of file that kept her awake. She talked for 4 minutes. She laid out the asset structure, the municipal counterparty risk, the depreciation schedule on the transit components. Then she stopped. There's also something I want to flag in the underlying risk model, she said. Edmund's expression did not change. Go ahead. The Pemberton deal is being weighted against the Carver-Doyle framework, which the prospectus mentions on page 41. I think there's a compounding error in the way that model handles long-duration bonds when you account for currency exposure over 30 years. It's approximately a 4-point differential on the risk floor, which in a portfolio this size, Miss Abubakar. Edmund's voice was still pleasant, carefully, specifically pleasant. The Carver-Doyle framework is an industry standard. It's been stress-tested across 3 decades of market cycles. I know. The error is in the stress testing methodology. The 1987 paper used a fixed currency baseline that, are you familiar with who developed the Carver-Doyle model? Yes, Dr. James Carver and Dr. Ruth Doyle, McGill, 1987. James Carver taught me personally. He spoke at our annual conference 4 years ago. Edmund leaned back in his chair. It was a small movement. It communicated everything. I have a great deal of respect for ambitious young analysts, but there is a difference between fresh eyes and inexperience dressed up as insight. Do you understand the distinction I'm making? Sylvia Oates, to his left, had not moved, but her pen, which had been making small marks on the page in front of her, had stopped. Gordon Fife was looking at his phone under the table. Patrick was looking at Josephine. Josephine said, Yes, I understand the distinction. I've also run the model correction 4 times using 2 independent frameworks, including a methodology published by Dr. Emeka Abubakar in 1998 that accounts for exactly the kind of currency drift that Carver-Doyle treats as a constant. Edmund's expression shifted. Not much. Just enough. I'm not familiar with that name. He published in the Journal of African Finance and Economic Development. Silence settled in the room that had a specific texture to it. It was not the silence of people who were thinking. It was the silence of people who had already decided. Gordon Fife looked up from his phone. Edmund said, That's a fairly niche source. The math doesn't become niche because of where it was published. There it was, not loud, not aggressive, just a fact, stated in the someone who was tired of watching facts treated as inconveniences. Gordon put his phone face down on the table. Sylvia's pen had not moved in 2 minutes. Edmund smiled, the specific smile of a man managing a conversation that has not gone the way he planned. Well, we'll be in touch. Josephine left the building on Bay Street and stood on the sidewalk in the February cold with her bag on her shoulder and her notebook in her hand. The wind off the lake came up Richmond and cut right through her coat. She did not call anyone. She just stood there for a moment. Then she walked to the coffee shop on the corner, sat at a window table, and opened the notebook to a blank page. She did not write anything. She just looked out the window at the people walking past in their coats, heads down against the wind, all of them going somewhere, all of them in a hurry. Then she took out her laptop and opened the anonymous forum, where, 14 months ago, she had posted 3 pages of calculations under the username SeedGord91. There were 47 new replies. She had not checked in 6 weeks. She had posted the note, waited, heard nothing meaningful, and let it sit. The forum was small, mostly graduate students, a few independent researchers. She had not expected much. The most recent reply was from a user named Theo Infrastructure. Posted 3 days ago. It said, "I've been trying to reach the person who wrote this for 2 months. I'm a portfolio risk analyst at the Bank of Canada. We used your correction methodology on a test portfolio last quarter. The differential on the risk floor came out to 4.1%. That is not a rounding error. Please contact me." Josephine read it twice. Then she read the reply above it, from 6 weeks ago, from a user named R.S. Pelletier. "I'm a professor at HEC Montreal. I assigned this note to my graduate seminar. 3 of my students independently verified the correction. We are preparing a formal response paper. We would like to attribute the original methodology. Who are you?" She scrolled up. There were more. A risk analyst in Vancouver, a pension fund manager in Ottawa, a retired economist in Halifax who had written 4 paragraphs in careful English, saying that this was the kind of work that took real courage to put into the world anonymously, and that he hoped whoever wrote it would one day put their name on it. Josephine sat with her coffee going cold and read every single reply. Outside, the February wind kept coming off the lake. The people on Bay Street kept walking with their heads down. She thought about her father's handwriting on the manila envelope. She thought about a conference room on the 32nd floor, where a man who had learned from James Carver had smiled at her with careful managed patience and said the words niche source. She opened a new message on the forum and typed, "My name is Josephine Abubakar. The correction methodology in the original note was derived from work published by Dr. Emeka Abubakar, Journal of African Finance and Economic Development, 1998. He was my father. I would like to talk." She pressed send. Then she picked up her coffee, which was cold, and drank it anyway. What happened in the next 11 days happened quickly, and then slowly, and then all at once, the way these things tend to. The Bank of Canada analyst, whose name turned out to be Theodore Racine, responded within 20 minutes. He had been sitting at his desk at 3 p.m., refreshing the forum thread every half hour for 3 days. He later told a reporter that when the message came through, he walked down the hall to his director's office and stood in the doorway without speaking until his director looked up and said, "What happened?" Theodore said, "I found the person who wrote the seed paper. And she's 29. She just came out of an interview at Meridian Capital." The director was quiet for a moment. "Meridian ran the Pemberton deal." "Yes." Another pause. "Call her." Professor Racine Pelletier at HEC Montreal. No relation to Theodore, a coincidence that would be mentioned in several subsequent articles, had already drafted a letter to the Canadian Journal of Economics, proposing a formal correction note to the Carver-Doyle framework. He needed the original author's consent to proceed. He had been waiting for 6 weeks. When Josephine emailed him that evening, he replied in 40 seconds. His email said, in its entirety, "I have been hoping you would write. Your father's 1998 paper is cited in our draft. I want to make sure we get that right. When can you call? None of this was public yet. Josephine was still in her apartment in Scarborough, sitting on the floor with her back against the couch, her laptop open, the burgundy notebook on the cushion behind her. Her mother was in the kitchen making jollof rice. The smell of tomatoes and Scotch bonnet peppers came under the door. Her mother did not know any of this was happening. She knew her daughter had had an interview that afternoon. She had texted at 5, "How did it go, sweetheart?" Josephine had written back, "I'll tell you at dinner." She had not figured out yet how to explain what was happening. She was still figuring it out when her phone rang and the screen said, Bank of Canada. Incoming call. The Globe and Mail broke the story on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks later. The headline read, Analyst's anonymous forum post reveals flaw in decades-old investment risk model used. Across major Canadian infrastructure funds, the subheadline said, Methodology derived from unpublished work by Nigerian-Canadian economist goes unrecognized for 26 years. Josephine was in a meeting at HEC Montreal when she saw the notification on her phone. She was sitting across the table from Professor Pelletier and 2 of his graduate students who had spent the previous 10 days helping her prepare the formal correction paper. One of the students, a quiet young woman from Winnipeg named Claire Otieno, had stayed until midnight 3 nights in a row. Josephine showed Pelletier the notification. He read it. He set the phone down on the table. He looked at Josephine over his reading glasses. Well, he said, I suppose we're done being quiet about it. By noon, the story had been picked up by the CBC, CTV, the Toronto Star, and the Financial Post. By 2 o'clock, a spokesperson for the Bank of Canada had confirmed that the institution was reviewing the risk-weighting methodology across its infrastructure portfolio. By 4, the Ontario Securities Commission had issued a brief statement saying it was aware of the findings and monitoring the situation. Edmund Hurst issued no statement. His communications director, according to a source later quoted in the Financial Post, spent Thursday afternoon in a closed-door meeting with the firm's legal team going over the recording of Josephine's February interview, which had been made, per Meridian's standard policy, for internal documentation purposes. A portion of that recording would eventually be published. It included Edmund saying the words niche source in the specific tone in which he had said them. It also included, at the end, after Josephine had left the room, Gordon Fife saying to the table, Well, that was a complete waste of everyone's time, and Edmund responding, These programs send us what they have. You can't fault them for trying. Nobody in the room had known they were still being recorded. The formal correction paper was published in the Canadian Journal of Economics 6 weeks later. The title was, A Systematic Error in Long-Duration Bond Risk, Weighting Under the Carver-Doyle Framework. Proposed Correction and Methodological Attribution. The second author listed was Dr. Abubakar, posthumously, with a footnote that read, Foundational Methodology Derived from Abubakar, E. 1998. Currency Drift and Long-Duration Exposure in Emerging Market Infrastructure. Journal of African Finance and Economic Development, Volume 4, Number 2. The first author was Josephine Abubakar, listed with her institutional affiliation as Dalhousie University, and a new secondary affiliation that had been formalized the week before. Visiting Research Fellow, Bank of Canada. Josephine's mother, Adunola Abubakar, found out about the paper the same way most people found out. She read about it in the Toronto Star while eating breakfast on a Tuesday morning in Scarborough. She had not known about the Bank of Canada Fellowship. Josephine had been waiting to tell her in person. She had been planning to do it at dinner on the weekend. Instead, Adunola read a paragraph in the newspaper that said her late husband's name, and his 1998 paper, and the phrase foundational methodology. And she had to set down her tea because her hands were shaking too much to hold it. She did not call Josephine right away. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, with the newspaper in front of her, and looked at the window and at the backyard, where the snow was still on the ground, and at the framed photo on the wall of a man in a graduation gown. At the University of Ibadan, who had driven a taxi in Toronto for 11 years, and died without knowing that 26 years later a journal in this country would print his name beside the word foundational. Then she picked up the phone. Josephine answered on the second ring. Adunola said, "I'm reading the paper." A long pause. "Mama, I was going to tell you at dinner." Adunola looked at the photo on the wall. She looked at it for a long time. "He knew," she said finally. "He knew he was right. He just couldn't make anyone listen." On the other end of the line, in a borrowed office at the Bank of Canada on Wellington Street, Josephine was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's why I kept going." Edmund Hurst resigned from Meridian Capital in April. The official statement cited a mutual decision to pursue new directions. The Financial Post reported that 3 institutional clients had begun reviewing their relationship with the firm following the OSC inquiry. The Pemberton deal was restructured using the corrected risk weighting model. The risk floor adjustment added 2.8% to the required capital reserve. $2 billion in additional security against a 3-decade horizon on one deal. On the day Edmund's resignation was announced, Josephine was in a lecture theater at the University of Toronto at the invitation of the economics department, presenting her findings to a room of graduate students and faculty. She was not thinking about Edmund Hurst. She was thinking about the last slide in her deck, which had a single image on it, a scan of the cover page of her father's 1998 paper, the title in plain type, his name underneath it, and the journal name below that. When she clicked to that slide, the room was quiet. She said, "This paper was published 26 years ago. It was cited 4 times in the North American literature in that period. My father sent query letters to 7 Canadian universities between 1993 and 1999, asking if there was a position available in their economics departments. He received 6 rejections and 1 non-response. He drove a taxi for 11 years. He died in 2008. She paused. "He left me the paper. He put my name on the envelope before he died. I don't know exactly when he did that. I think about it sometimes." Nobody in the room made a sound. The math he did in 1998 was correct. The math I did in the forum post was an extension of his math. The correction that is now being applied across multiple major Canadian infrastructure portfolios is built on a foundation that a man put down in a small journal 26 years ago because no one in this country would give him a room. She looked out at the faces in the lecture hall. He deserved the room. So did the math. That night, Josephine sat at her mother's kitchen table in Scarborough. Adunola had made jollof rice again, and egusi soup and chin-chin for dessert, and she had put candles on the table, which she only did at Christmas and on birthdays. Josephine looked at the candles. "Mom, it's Tuesday. I know what day it is." They ate. Outside, the April ice was finally melting off the roof and dripping past the kitchen window in slow, uneven drops. After dinner, Adunola brought out a box from the bedroom closet. Not the box with the manila envelope. Josephine had that. A different box. Smaller. Inside were letters. 43 rejection letters, rubber-banded in bundles by year, from 1993 to 1999. Each one addressed to Dr. Emeka Abubakar. Each one polite. Each one final. Josephine went through them slowly. Her mother sat across from her with her hands folded on the table. At the bottom of the box was one more envelope, unopened. Postmarked 2001, from Dalhousie University. "He never opened it," Adunola said. "He got it and he put it in the box and he never opened it. He said he was tired." Josephine held it for a long time. Then she opened it. Inside was a letter from the Department of Economics at Dalhousie University, dated March 12, 2001, saying that they had reviewed his curriculum vitae and his published work, and they were pleased to invite him to interview for a junior faculty position in the fall term. They had never heard back from him. He had never opened the letter. Josephine set it on the table between them. Adunola looked at it. She did not cry. She had done her crying earlier, privately, before Josephine arrived. She just looked at it the way a person looks at something that explains a great deal and changes nothing. "He was so tired," she said. He was so tired by then. Josephine folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. She put the envelope in the box with the 43 rejection letters. She put the box on the table between the candles. Then she picked up the burgundy notebook from her bag, opened it to page 1, and found the 4 Yoruba words in her mother's handwriting. The ground holds the seed. She looked at her mother. Adunola reached across the table and put her hand over Josephine's. Outside, the ice kept dripping. The city kept running. Somewhere downtown on Wellington Street, in a borrowed office that now had her name on a door card, a desk waited with a live research file open on the screen, full of numbers that her father had been the first to understand. He had planted something in a small journal in 1998 in a country that had told him repeatedly he did not belong in its rooms. His daughter had walked into one of those rooms with his math in her notebook and stood there until they had no choice but to listen. If you know someone who is carrying work the world hasn't made room for yet, share this tonight. Leave their name in the comments. Subscribe to Valor Tales because the ground holds more seeds than most people ever think to look for.